Guys, Skirk has been out for more than a week now, and after testing her out at multiple investment levels, I have a pretty good idea of how strong she is. In this video, I'll talk about my findings and my updated calculations on her, and whether or not I think she's strong enough to contend with Mavuika as the best DPS in the game. So, first things first, Skirk is a bit better than I thought she would be in pre-release. This is mainly because, shortly before she came out, they essentially buffed her attack speed by quite a bit. This only applied starting from the Creator Experience Service release, and wasn't the case in any beta prior. In my original assumptions, I thought that at most she'd be able to complete 4 chains of her full normal attack strings, but it turns out she can do a bit more than that. As a whole, combo-wise, you can do a couple different things, and so I'll categorize them separately. First is the Mindless combo, basically a combo where you use the Elemental skill, then burst immediately, then do 3 full strings of normal attacks while dashing midway through the 5th normal attack animation to cancel it, then do 1 or 2 normal attacks, a charge attack to absorb the Void Rifts and replenish her point bar, and then attack until her window ends. What makes this mindless is that you basically use everything as soon as it's available. The burst at the start of her window, and then you spam attacks until you have to use a charge attack to maintain her uptime. An improvement to this would be using her elemental burst at a different time. In fact, using the burst right after the elemental skill is a tad bit slow in terms of animation time, and so, as an alternative, you can use it to cancel a normal attack animation and speed up her combo execution as a result. For example, you can use her skill, then do a full normal attack string, and then use the burst after the 5th normal attack. Skirk's 5th attack is her slowest one in terms of animation time if you don't cancel it. So, just from an animation standpoint, it makes sense to cancel it with the burst. After that, you can proceed as before for as long as her skill lasts. The only problem with this combo is that the burst buffs her normal attacks by a bit, and while that's not super significant, it makes her first normal attack string weaker. As a result, as a final alternative, you can simply use the burst a bit earlier. So, skill, 1 or 2 normal attacks, then you use the burst, and then you go on like in the previous combos until the skill ends. This is the combo that, for me, produced the best total damage for her rotations. By itself, this buff made Skirk's best team quite a bit more competitive from a DPS standpoint, putting it in range with the Mavuika Mel teams that use Shilonen. It's not exactly at the same DPS level, but it's in a close enough range that it can go one way or another depending on the exact scenario or matchup. But let's put a pause on this whole Skirk and Mavuika thing for a second, because I want to talk to you about this new interesting game I stumbled upon, Silver and Blood Requiem, which is the sponsor of this video. This game's got a dark medieval gothic vibe, mixed with a typical Japanese animation style, which makes it quite similar to a game like Castlevania. As for the gameplay, it's an RPG type game, so perfect for mobile. It's a strategy game first and foremost, where you position your characters on a grid and then watch them fight the opponent's army while performing some really flashy attacks with their special moves. Also, the character progression system is different from Genshin, and their drop rates is much higher. The SSR characters, so the highest rarity available, has a 4% drop rate. That makes it quite likely for you to get the high rarity characters within a couple 10 pulls. This game also has a quite impressive audio department, with OSTs composed by Yasunori Nishiki, who participated in the composition of the melodies of games with incredible music, like Final Fantasy VII Remake and Kingdom Hearts 3. As for the character voices, you'll hear big hits like Takehito Koyasu, Akari Kito, Toshiyuki Morikawa, Kengo Kawanishi, and Shinichiro Miki. So, this game is really interesting, and I think you should give it a try, either by clicking the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code right here. Also, make sure to check out the current web event where you'll be able to get the in-game resources from. Blood Memories Awaken, the path home begins. Now, Mavuika does have an upper theoretical level compared to the Mel theme I've shown, which is the variant where you replace Shilonen with a Constellation 6 Jansen. This is currently the damage ceiling for Constellation 0 5-stars, and it surpasses the Skirk theme by quite a bit. Personally though, I consider the Shilonen variant of the Mavuika Mel theme the best in a general sense, because the Shilonen is amazing at generating fighting spirit for Mavuika. In fact, Shilonen's value here comes from generating 90 points for Mavuika Mavuika very quickly, which helps making the composition consistent. While the Janssen variant can still maximize her point gauge throughout a full rotation, there are plenty of situations where Mavuika ends an Abyss room early and has less points than you'd expect at the start of the next room. That's where Shilunen comes in handy. Also, in the new endgame mode, the Stygian Onslaught, where you start with 0 energy, or in Mavuika's case at 0 fighting spirit, Shilunen being able to fill her gauge so quickly becomes really helpful in the first rotation of the fight. The bottom line here is that Skirk's best team has similar DPS as one of the best Mavuika teams, and that's very impressive. Of course though, there is more nuance here than just the theoretical damage. Mavuika, for example, has more AoE than Skirk, which is especially noticeable on her elemental burst nuke. On the other hand, Skirk has huge crowd control thanks to freeze, and she has massive damage contribution from her backline, granted you use Furina and Escoffier. Both of these things make these characters excel in different ways. Moving on, there are rotations where Skirk can use both her big elemental burst nuke and their on-field normal attack spam state in the same window. The most typical one is the one you get in the first room of the Abyss, where you start at full energy. In this scenario, Skirk can use her big burst and then use the elemental skill right after, and that improves her total damage by a lot in that first rotation. There are a couple complications, however. The first one is that both of her best artifact sets don't mesh well with this rotation. Finale of the Deep has the most issues, because this set will disable its normal attack damage bonus buff when the burst hits, meaning that after using the burst, you basically will be fighting without an artifact set bonus for half of her main window. Mana should say also has issues, as the set typically requires a couple seconds to build the crit rate stacks up, even with Furina on the team. In an optimal rotation, you use the burst as soon as you go on field with Skirk, and so you won't have that time to build the setup. On top of that, this rotation also synergizes badly with some of her weapons. The Finale of the Deep weapon, so the arguable best free-to-play option for her, and their signature weapon as well, only activate their passive if she uses her elemental skill. This means they will be half-assed for the elemental burst damage. Lastly, this way you're extending her window to 15-16 seconds of field time, which means supports like Furina or Shenhe, whose buffing effects are on a strict timer, will be able to buffer for less of her window compared to traditional rotations. As a result, even if this first rotation can achieve more total damage than a normal attack-only rotation, it totals to less DPS because of how the burst is compared to the norm. Now, I personally still think it's worth to do it, because the total damage per rotation is greater, and personally I value that quite highly. And also, the front load is really nice from the elemental burst, because it allows her to take out entire waves of mobs in a single instance, and that's very effective. And besides, there is even a way to do it consistently and not just in the first room. Basically, you use a Hydro and a Cryo character on the team to generate a Void Rift, use Skirk's hold elemental skill to absorb it, then set up the rotation with your supports, then go on field with Skirk to use her burst, and then proceed with her elemental skill to normal attack combo. This burst will have fewer points than the previous version, and so its multipliers will be lower, but since you're using your elemental skill, you will at least activate the passive from a few other weapons options, and that can even it out. It's still not optimal from a pure DPS standpoint, but it can prove to be useful if you need that extra damage at the start of the rotation. Of course, in terms of front load, Mavuika is stronger, but in a way it's hard to compare the two, so Skirk and Mavuika, because they have different damage distributions in their kit. Mavuika focuses on her burst considerably more than Skirk, while the second has higher continuous damage throughout the rotation with her normal attacks. While it's nice for Mavuika to have such a strong initial attack most of the time, it sometimes causes her to way overkill an opponent wave. For example, in the current Abyss structure, with a small wave of opponents before the boss, unless your Citrali is strong enough with her burst to clear the wave, you either have to use your Mavuika nuke to do that, or you'll have to extend your rotation a bit to kill them before you use the burst. Both scenarios decrease Mavuika's effective rotation damage noticeably. Of course, there are also positives, because her burst being able to hit 1,000,000 damage at solid investment level makes her able to end rooms with just that attack quite consistently, and that's what makes her one of the fastest DPSs in the game in terms of clear speed of the Abyss. However, what I'm trying to say is that it's not always that great of a thing to have more of your damage skewed towards your front load, mode, and there are scenarios that also benefit Skirk's damage profile more. Moving on, I want to talk about her teams, but first let me remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. In terms of compositions, it was already known in pre-release that Skirk relies on Escoffier to truly be top tier, but this has felt even more noticeable to me after her release. I'm not even talking about a damage difference, because for that specifically it's about what I expected, but just from a mechanical standpoint, because Escoffier is one of the few field cryo DPSs that also provides great support, and her being able to deal continuous cryo damage throughout the rotation helps against specific enemies. For example, in the Stygian Onslaught mode against the Overseer, I've noticed a wide gap between teams with Escoffier and teams without her, because the second type of teams just can't keep his cryo shield down as consistently, and so it translates to more effective damage for Escoffier compositions. To a lesser degree, this is also the case for other types of shields that can get taken down by cryo application, but Stygian Onslaught is definitely where I felt the reliance on Escoffier more, also because it's just a bigger DPS check than the Abyss. Now, I've seen people say that they thought Skirk will be even worse without Escoffier, and I kind of think that's just because they had the wrong expectations about her. I think some people legitimately expected Skirk to be bad without Escoffier, when it was never like that. It was more like Skirk is top tier with Escoffier and just decent without, like average Natlan DPS level. With the post-release findings about her combos, her weaker teams also became a bit better. Not a game-changing difference, but crossing 80,000 DPS is still comfortably in range with late Fontaine level. I still find the gap between Escoffier teams and Escoffier-less teams hard to digest. I don't like this design at all, especially because Escoffier is a limited 5-star that came out a patch before her, so in terms of polling for these characters, it's not great. In a way, Mavuika is similar in this regard, because she also relies on Citlali to reach her DPS ceiling, and in a way for her it's even worse, because Citlali is a limited 5-star that released in the same banner cycle, like Genshin, what the heck are you doing? The other side of the coin, however, is that the Mavuika teams without Citlali are considerably better than the Skirk teams without Escoffier. My favorite is definitely Vape with Furina, both in terms of damage and consistency. I'm not a fan of the Melf teams without Citlali because they're either pretty clunky or they just lack consistency in terms of fighting spirit generation. Still, even if Mavuika has better alternatives, Genshin is kind of going towards a direction where it punishes you if you don't have the best of the best. For example, in Onslaught, Tulpa requires you to have characters that can quickly deal with the minions he summons, otherwise you're basically fucked. The only character that can do it for Mavuika without sacrificing a vast amount of her team damage is Citlali, since cryo attacks basically one-shot the minions. So even if Mavuika is more versatile in terms of teams compared to Skirk, I feel like this will matter less and less if the game keeps going towards a direction where you need very specific characters to clear a stage. I feel like the way they're shaping the game, how you can perform in your niche will matter more than how you can perform outside of your niche, and in that sense Mavuika and Skirk are pretty close. Still, it needs to be said that at the current stage, Mavuika being more flexible still helps her, and I've actually seen pretty impressive clears of the Overseer boss with her, granted you invested enough money though. Meanwhile, I'm not sure there is any way Skirk can get through this. Feels bad, man. Lastly, let's talk about how she performs at higher investment level. I honestly really like how they designed their constellations, because she has really powerful constellations 1 and 2, and also a very good signature weapons, but not in a way where it completely changes how her kit works, or it makes you feel really bad for not getting them. The trade-off is that a Constellation 2 signature weapon Skirk is much weaker than a Constellation 2 signature weapon Mavuika, mainly for 2 reasons. The first is that Mavuika's Constellation 2 is just absurd, a much bigger damage increase than any Skirk constellation. The second is that Mavuika is much more of a hyper carry than Skirk, because she basically does all of the damage on her teams. As a result, any damage increase for her results in a much more meaningful gain for the team than Skirk's gains do for hers. If we're really talking whaling now, Citlali also has much better supportive constellations than Skirk's supporting cast does, and if you get Constellation 2 on Citlali, you'd have to look at Constellation 6 for Skirk to get similar performance. Basically, what I believe is that a Constellation 0 they're similarly strong in their niche, but a Constellation 2 level Mavuika is just better, and she also performs quite well outside of her niche, while the same can't be said for Skirk. And with this, I'm done for today. If If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe. Also go check Silver and Blood Requiem either through the link in the description below or the QR code, and go check the Inefa video I made a few days ago. Bye bye.